How should we understand the relationship between Greek literature, poetry, and drama, and philosophy? The little-known Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico is incredibly important for a proper framework to understanding the Greek classics, this monumental movement within the literary tradition of sublime violence leading to the pathologies of love, the disintegration of the pathologies of love, to skepticism and rationality, the birth of philosophy, wherein true civilization begins. To quote from Vico's New Science to illustrate the point, he says, "As the first wisdom of the pagan world, poetic wisdom must have begun with the metaphysics, which, unlike the rational and abstract metaphysics of today's scholars, sprang from the sense and imagination of the first people, for they lack the power of reason and were entirely guided by their vigorous sensations and vivid imaginations. Great poetry has three tasks: to invent sublime myths, to excite to ecstasy, and to teach the masses to act virtuously." Accepting sublime violence as the starting point of human thinking and the origins of civilization, however dark the origin in fact is, Hesiod's theogony, therefore, reflects the old cosmos of the Greeks, those first people who lack the power of reason and therefore were guided by their vigorous sensations and vivid imaginations. For that is what the theogony is, as anyone who has read it knows. It is a poem governed by lust and destruction, violence and sexuality. Just read the poem to understand this. The theogony is a praise poem to the violence of the gods, specifically the violence and power of Zeus, who is able to overthrow the other deities, the Titans, who in turn, led by Kronos, overthrew the original primordial deities through acts of violence. Therefore, the poetic metaphysics spoken of in the theogony by that ancient imagination is one in which the pathology of sexual lust leads to violence, and from violence to governing power. The power that orders the cosmos and the world is lust, sex, and war. Yet according to Vico, is this actually something virtuous? Is this what we should be teaching the masses? Of course not. Homer, Hesiod's great rival, therefore, begins the transformation to what Vico calls the new poetic metaphysics. In fact, the bulk of the new science deals with this concept of poetic metaphysics and is deeply related to the question of who Homer was. Homer's cosmos still has the violent gods, but his heroes are mortal humans like us. Their heroic actions are found in love rather than violence, though they are still ensconced in the violent cosmos. Achilles, Patroclus, Priam, Hector, Odysseus, you know these figures. You have Hector comforting his crying infant son, Astyanax, on the walls of Troy. You have Patroclus healing his wounded comrade, Eurypylus, on the beaches of Troy. You have Priam braving enemy lines and entering the tent of Achilles because of his love for his son, Hector. You have then, at long last, the embrace of Priam, an avowed enemy whom Achilles has just declared he wants to kill, at the climax of the poem, when Achilles, before the face of Priam, and Priam at the feet of Achilles, embraces him as a friend, lifts him up, forgives him, restores the body of Hector, and bestows a peace to his enemy. All of these truly heroic moments are moments of comforting love, but the comforting love that is sung so greatly of by Homer are still the realities of the pathological heart. The Homer of the Odyssey continues the evolution of the Homeric cosmos with the hero Odysseus. Wily as he is, the Odyssey marries cunning with compassion, rationality with love, to bring our hero home to his family. Odysseus is a calculating man, evidence of his growth in rationality, the growing consciousness of rationality in human civilization. His rationality serves his pathological desire, that is true, because he seeks to be reunited with his family and homeland, which he has been deprived of since venturing off to fight in the Trojan War. While the Odyssey does bring us a greater inclusion of rationality in understanding what moves human action, again, rationality, even wily and cunning Odysseus, is really still governed by the pathologies of his heart. All the rational calculations that he does are done in order to be returned home so that he may reunite with Telemachus and Penelope. Homer's poetic metaphysics displaces Hesiod's sublime metaphysics. The cosmos of love triumphs over the cosmos of violence. Yet, both the cosmos of love and the cosmos of sublime violence are pathological realities. And this story reaches its apex in Aeschylus and the Oresteia, wherein the Oresteia is the great culmination of this post-Homeric attempt to marry rationality with pathology in order to give way to reason and civilization. For that is where the Oresteia ends, in a courtroom with Orestes pleading his case on how he murdered his mother because of the devoted love he had for his father, and therefore there is a rational justice to his actions. The Greek tragedians are now wrestling with the ramification of the post-Homeric world, a cosmos of hope found in love, found upon the realities of justice. But this world is shattered by the Persian War, the injustices of the Persian War, as well as the eventual Peloponnesian War, and the great and tremendous injustices of that conflict between Athens and Sparta. With the Homeric cosmos in decline, the Greek poets turn their attention now to a philosophical concept, to Dike, to justice. The poets in dramatic form are laying the seeds for the birth of philosophy. Sophoclean justice is premised on the family. Euripidean justice is rooted in compassion and pity and mercy. I have treated these notions in more detail in my 90-minute lecture on the meaning of Greek drama. And if you want to learn more about that, I suggest that you listen to that lecture, where we cover the entirety of the movement of Greek drama, heavily influenced by this basic theoretical framework offered by Vico. But in the rise of the discussions of justice in the dramatic playwrights, we eventually reached the birth of satire, as the Greek poetic tradition, now represented by the satirists, scoffs at the plausibility of this poetic cosmos of love and justice. Aristophanes, the most famous of the satirists, is a reactionary, as Leo Strauss points out, seeking a return to the old cosmos of violence while satirizing Athenian hypocrisy. Aristophanes is a reactionary not because he wants to return to the old cosmos of violence because he thinks it's better than this cosmic project of love and justice, But because the project, this cosmos of love and justice, is not true. The cosmos of violence is the governing reality of the world in which we live. There is no justice, and there is no rationality, and there is no love as spoken of by Homer and the post-Homeric poets. Euripides is wrong, Sophocles is wrong, Aeschylus is wrong, Homer is wrong. The birth of satire represents a form of extreme skepticism, which, paradoxically, also represents the divorce of pathology from rationality. Again, because rationality doesn't exist. Yet this extreme skepticism, despite its divorce of pathology and rationality, in its conclusion that rationality doesn't exist, is what actually allows for the birth of philosophical rationalism. At this moment, the Greek literary tradition proves itself incapable of providing a stable metaphysics for understanding our place in the cosmos. The eclipse of the Greek literary tradition leaves the cosmos in ruin, and it is in the ruins of the cosmos, wrought from the failures of poetry, which provides for the possibility of philosophy. And here is where Plato shows up. Plato, who wanted to be a dramatist, takes up the challenge of dealing with the question of the divine, the cosmos, and man, not as three separate questions, but as one integrated, holistic question, an integrated, holistic reality. Philosophy supersedes the failure of poetry, in Plato's mind, hence Plato's seeming negativity to the poets. We cannot, with Plato, turn back to the old cosmos and the old gods and the old poets who have failed us. We must progress into the new cosmos, born of the skepticism of poetic wisdom and whether the virtue the poet sought to teach was virtue at all. And we know what Plato thought concerning this question. In Plato, through Vico's eyes, we achieve the proper birth of metaphysics, divorced from sublime poetry. In Plato, a cosmos of ordered justice, through reason, finally emerges. This is why Plato is a political philosopher, devoted to the concepts of justice and rationality in all his dialogues. Whether the Republic or the Laws or the Euthyphro or the Crito, even the Symposium and the Timaeus, the notions of justice and rationality are embedded in all of Plato's dialogues. Post-Platonic philosophy, therefore, moves us down the path of rationality, leading eventually to the materialism of Epicureanism and the cosmic oneness of Stoicism. Rationality triumphs over love. Rationality displaces pathology by the time we reach the writings of the Greek philosophers. When Vico writes that Plato established the fact that human institutions are guided by providence, he means that Plato established the fact that reason, because God is reason, is what truly guides human civilization. This is the triumph of philosophy over poetry, and why, in the course of history, poetry starts first and philosophy comes after. I would be remiss here not to point out that a lot of the technical details of Vico's work is generally discredited and not accepted by contemporary scholarship, like his ruminations on the technicalities of Homeric authorship. But this is not the genius of Vico, and this is not what concerns us here. What concerns us here is this basic framework that he provides of understanding the history and the progression of human thinking and the humanities, how we move from the sublime, violent, pathological metaphysics of poetry, and how in its failure to provide stability and meaning to our lives, we eventually arrive at the rational and abstract metaphysics of philosophy. And this framework really does help the student and the reader of the Greek classics understand that monumental developmental shift in the relationship of Greek writing and thinking between literature and philosophy, because we see the decline of poetry and drama as we approach the philosophic age, and why Plato and the post-Platonic philosophers have such a confrontational approach to poetry. The framework that Vico provides allows us to read chronologically the writings of the Greek classics, the great poetry of Hesiod and Homer, the poems and the dramas of the Athenian playwrights, and how it is only after this collapse, this failure of poetic metaphysics to provide us meaning in the cosmos, that we arrive at the birth of philosophy. Anyone who studies the Greek classics and the humanities, focusing on the Greek classics especially, will realize the great thematic and conceptual changes in that chronological progression. For it is in the poets and the dramatists that we have the great themes of the human heart and the human body. And yet, by the time we reach philosophy, we now encounter the great themes of human rationality and the soul. It is the framework provided by Vico in the new science that allows us to see that this is not a stark division, but in fact the process of dialectic.